When it comes to autism and emotional intelligence, there is one question that we need to ask. How can autistic people show apathy and their emotions when it seems hard for them to do so? Well, that is what we're going to work out. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Aspergian Journal. One of the biggest myths in society about autistic people is that they haven't got the ability or capability to show apathy towards others and can't express their own emotions. What if I told you that autistic people are more than capable of showcasing empathy and emotions, not only of their own, but also of others? Would you believe me? On the face of it, you might think that that's impossible, especially if you've got experience as an autistic person. But I think autistic people are more capable of things than what they give themselves credit for. And you have to understand that there is various internal and external factors that play a massive role in an autistic person's efforts to try and show apathy and share their emotions with others, when it might seem hard for them to do so, because sometimes it can be the fear of rejection, judgement, and misunderstanding from neurotypical people that might harpen or hinder their efforts to try and get better at showing apathy and their emotions towards others. Naturally, an autistic person's mind works differently in a neurological sense compared to non-autistic people. But that said, it's not that they're not capable of being able to understand and read the social and emotional clues in society. A lot of the time, it is because they haven't had the training or the insights from others to be able to recognise what those clues or signs are. Neurotypical people are able to identify these clues and that more naturally than autistic people, and usually they take this skill for granted, whereas autistic people have to learn this ability along with many other aspects of their autistic life, and that from scratch, and they have to learn the hard way, because what they usually do find is that the world is pretty much incapable of showing the patience, the compassion, and the willingness to be patient with autistic people and guide them in the right direction to become better communicators or be able to relate to other people in an emotional sense and be able to understand society better so they can navigate it more efficiently. Now, I'm not saying that autistic people will become masters when it comes to understanding and nurturing their own emotional intelligence skills, but just by having the awareness and the self-reflection to want to get better at these skills and be able to develop themselves to a point where they can navigate a chaotic and misunderstood world more better, the more independent and that they can be, and be able to tackle issues when they occur more effectively without having a negative effect on their overall well-being. There are many different factors that can contribute towards an autistic person's inability to show apathy and showcase their emotions. And some of these can be sensory overload, where this is where their sensory inputs and using the five senses becomes overwhelming. And when they struggle to filter and process sensory information in a safe and manageable way, it can lead to stress, discomfort, mental distortion, and even physical pain. And when those overwhelming thoughts and feelings get too much, the autistic person becomes very vulnerable to their surroundings, and they have to find a place of safety, and which, if they aren't aware of their surroundings, they can put themselves in harm's way. When an autistic person is in a state of sensory overload or having a meltdown, and that as a result of those sensory inputs becoming too much, it does make it difficult for them to be able to have that contrast or compartmentalization of the inner and outer experiences and of what's going on around them. Where neurotypical people are able to do this quite effectively and naturally, an autistic person, without the right training or without the right skills, and they struggle to be able to differentiate the two. When a neurotypical person sees an autistic person when they don't recognise emotions or of other people, it can often be misinterpreted for that person to be quite selfish, unkind, or even arrogant in how they are behaving or how they're responding to that person's emotional state. But that is so far away from the truth. Because I've always said that autistic people are some of the most kindest, caring, and well-mannered people that you'll ever meet. But because society places a lot of pressure and adversities that they have to overcome, and a lot of the time this causes an autistic person to be withdrawn from the outer world and basically live in their own world where they don't have a lot of people around them to be able to express their emotions in a safe way. And because of that, this leads to them to having like a mental or emotional burnout. And if it's left unchecked, it can have real dire consequences. And if it's not managed effectively, or be able to have the right outlets in place and for them to express their emotions and in a safe way. When I was growing up as a child and even getting into my teenage years, I often struggled to recognise and process my own emotions, but all that led to was me getting overwhelmed with anxiety and despair to the point where I was in a real bad place with my overall well-being. So in a practical sense, how can I be able to notice the emotions of others if I can't even process and express my own? And that is a dilemma that a lot of autistic people do struggle with, and they have to overcome that the hard way. Now, as I got older, I got to a point with my mental health where I had to face what I was fearing for quite a long time, and to overcome that and process them. And that because it was my only way to be able to free myself from the shackles and that I created. And that's the thing. Sometimes we create our own miseries, our own, in visual prisons that we're locking ourselves into because we aren't able to face the things that we fear the most. If we tackle them head on, and we overcome them and accept whatever happened in the past so we can move forward into the future, the more freer we'll feel and become as human beings. And surely that is a great feeling that everyone should have. Why continue to live a life of despair and being in denial about things when all it's doing is just keeping you in the same place, when realistically we want to move forward and elevate ourselves as individuals to greater heights than what we could ever achieve in the past. And that philosophy can also apply to autistic people as well. They are far more capable of many things than what they realise. If you struggle to embrace your emotions and be able to showcase apathy because of out of fear of judgement or rejection, or allowing unresolved trauma to stop you from being able to develop the skills necessary to be able to tackle things in life more generally and be able to build friendships and relationships with others, which often requires us to be in touch with our emotions and be able to show apathy towards others. If we aren't able to do that, then we are locking ourselves away from the many opportunities that can flourish and from outside of ourselves. And if we only have the ability, not also that, the willingness to do so. Another factor can be societal misunderstandings. What this usually consists of is neurotypical people's misunderstanding to be able to identify when autistic people might show apathy in different ways compared to just verbalizing them. Like, autistic people are far more capable of showing their emotions in a practical sense by doing an activity or a chore or something that means something to the other person, rather than just verbalizing their emotions or acknowledging someone else's emotions and just by using words. Now that is where the differences and division can be created and between neurotypical people and autistic people, because neurotypical people usually have a more concrete sense of how emotions should be expressed. Like, it's like just one way approach, where autistic people might do it in more creative ways. And because of this, and autistic people sometimes are being treated with such disdain, rudeness, and sometimes distant influence of behaviours from neurotypical people, because they are incapable of being able to understand why autistic people might showcase their emotions and apathy in practical ways compared to then verbalizing them. But it's also it's not the autistic person's fault for them being on the autistic spectrum, nor is it their responsibility to behave in certain ways to satisfy other people. I've lost count of the many times that I've experienced situations where I felt like the world was against me, despite doing all the great things that comes from being an autistic person. I mean, it's bad enough that autistic people have to go through like this internal questioning of their own identities, especially if they receive a misdiagnosis for their autism, and the associated mental strain that it can have from society, and the untrue judgments that can come from other people. As autistic people only want to be accepted by society and be treated equally, they have to face those misinjustices on their own, and it can often lead to a point where they might think, oh, have I said something wrong? Or if they're worrying about the response that they receive from others, as well as the fear of rejection and judgment from others. Because all that does, it keeps them, locked into that habit of just keeping their emotions to themselves. And then it just causes this discourse in society of how they communicate with people and their ability to build friendships and relationships with others. Another factor can also be autistic masking and social fatigue. Now, I have done a video about autistic masking and how it involves autistic people hiding their autistic traits from other people, often out of fear of rejection, judgment and anxiety and many other mental health aspects, and to try and fit into society. But all it results in is having a detrimental effect on their overall well-being. And often it raises the question of, why does an autistic person have to hide their true self to satisfy other people, when realistically you should be embracing who you are and focus on your own journey of personal development to making yourself that 1% better every single day, and when you do that, the right people will come to you. Even as I talk about emotional intelligence and how it can be, and how autistic people can become a bit more better with expressing empathy and their emotions, you got to realise that not everyone that you meet in society is deserving of your emotions or apathy. It's mainly about having the knowledge and the skills of knowing as and when showing your emotions and apathy are required. By doing so, you can become better at communicating with people and be able to socialise with people, because you can relate to them and on various things, even if it's an activity that you are doing, or they're talking about a subject and that you can relate to, or you have a strong opinion about. But ultimately, it's just making yourself, a more better person that can tackle issues and situations more greater, and becoming more independent as an individual, and not having to be reliant on other people. Because as we get older, the people that are closest to us, sometimes that might drift away, or they might pass away, like parents, for example. And if you haven't got a close-knit family, like for me, I don't have really a close-knit family, if I'm not able to manage situations better on my own, if something happened to my parents tomorrow, who would be there to do it for me if I'm not able to do it for myself? And that is something that a lot of autistic people need to think about, but also parents to worry about when it comes to their children and how will they manage life and the world and not on their own, and that if they're not around to do it for them. Masking can also be linked to the previous video that I did about autism stimming and how autistic people use stimming behaviours to be able to cope with certain situations or to be able to regulate their overall well-beings. I also explained in that video the contrast of how certain behaviours and that can be safe and that in a way for an autistic person to show enjoyment and contentment for things and that they do in their lives, but also on the other flip side to that, when there's maybe certain behaviours they're doing and that might be showcasing emotional distress, and they can be using those physical movements to convey their emotions and thoughts, especially if they struggle to verbalise them effectively towards others. Throughout my life as an autistic person, I've had to hide or mask my autism traits to try and fit into society or to be accepted by my neurotypical peers, whilst dealing with that inner dilemma of that I had for my autism identity and how the original diagnosis that I got at the age of 4 for classic autism with moderate learning difficulties did not really fit the bill of who I really was. And it was only when I got to like 18 years old that I got a doctor's report saying that I was showing signs of more Asperger's syndrome, even though I never really got round to getting re-diagnosed. Now, I have done a video about the dilemma of getting a diagnosis or not, and I explain that, even if you choose to get a diagnosis or not, you can still build a fulfilling life for yourself, and that a diagnosis is not really, it doesn't give you a manual or something to be able to build a successful life with. And we should be moving away from, this labelling or certification of our autism and just embrace it as part of who we are. So now we've looked at some of the factors of why autistic people might struggle with expressing empathy and their emotions. The question really is now, how can autistic people develop their emotional intelligence skills? The first thing you have to understand when it comes to emotional intelligence, that it is very fluid in its nature, and there is no set rules or standards that you've got to adhere to. It's just mainly about a person's ability to understand, perceive and interpret their emotions and the dynamics of a situation or environment, of when it's safe to showcase your emotions and empathise with other people that might be in that same scenario. A good example here might be is when you're going into a new situation, naturally you're not going to just open your heart out to a bunch of strangers and that might have the wrong intentions about your emotion or empathy or anything like that. But there might be situations, especially if you are around a group of people that you see on a regular basis and you have to communicate with them, even if it's part of work or being part of an activity group, or a support group or anything, you know, and you start to get to know people, especially if they have similar experiences and interests to you, then that is an outlet of how you can, you know, practice becoming more better of recognizing and showing apathy and your emotions to other people. I've come up with 3 steps that I think that will help you become better with understanding emotional intelligence. Not to become masters, because I don't think anyone on this entire planet can become an expert or a master of emotional intelligence, because it's something that I think evolves over time, and that requires us to become better understanding and learn new things as you go along. Number 1, understand and practice more self-awareness and self-reflection. This step is about having the self-awareness and that for your own emotions and where is your skills at the moment of how you can express empathy and emotions to other people. Because one of the biggest things that a lot of people might struggle with when it comes to coming to terms with their emotions is having the self-awareness of them. The amount of people out there in the world, not just in the autistic community, but even neurotypical people as well, and that is that they don't have the self-awareness of what areas of life they could be lacking in, and they have to come to terms of understanding that before they can take the steps necessary to become better at the things that they might be weak in. And all that is part of building self-awareness. And this can apply to anything. You know, having the awareness and that you might be struggling with certain aspects of your life is going to help you massively in the long run. Because without it, how can you make the necessary steps that you need if you don't understand the things that you need to improve on? The kind of questions that you need to ask yourself, and only you can answer these yourself, is like, what past experiences and memories are carrying huge emotional weight on your mind and soul that is stopping you or holding you back from moving forward? To help you through this stage, I would suggest that keeping a journal that'll help you track and record your progress, and to be able to cultivate a journaling routine, as this tool is very vital when it comes to building self-reflection. Now that is the next stage after self-awareness, because when you have the awareness of the things that you are weak in and you want to develop on, you need to self-reflect and on what areas of that were good, what areas were bad, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? What worked well, or what things do I need to improve on? You know, you don't go from, you know, not being able to express your emotions one minute and you're able to do so overnight. You know, Rome wasn't built in a single day. You know, you have to have those self-reflecting stages, and there can be multiple of them, and to go from one thing to another. And sometimes you can't always look at the start line and the finishing line as definitive, like this is the starting point and that's the end point. Sometimes when it comes to developing your skills and overcoming things that are holding you back, you know, sometimes you could be self-reflecting on your journey as you go along. And whatever's happened in your past and that has stopped you from moving forward, you'll never forget it. It'll just be the case of that you've come to terms with it and you're able to move on. Believe you me, there's been plenty of times where I've had things that have hold me back, and I've had to come to terms with it, forgive myself, and move forward and act to the things that I want in life. And that, because just by staying backwards, it's just gonna have an impact on your standard of living, and you're just gonna feel crap, and that as a result of it. So just by coming to terms with it, having the awareness of it, and have a goal in mind, and keep self-reflecting on the progress you are making towards that goal, and then the better you are going to become. Naturally, as you go on that journey, those goals and that might get better or bigger, or you might evolve as a person as you make that development. And that's okay. Sometimes it's not always as black and white as it might look. And sometimes you've got to focus on the journey and the progress you are making, and how do you feel as a person deep down as a result of the steps you are taking. That should be the focus, rather than just the end goal, even though it is good to have one. Because if you focus on the end goal and you get there, the enjoyment of achieving something is not going to be as strong as it is by living in the moment and embracing the journey as you're going through it. Number 2, make the most of little acts of kindness seen in the world and use them as opportunities to showcase your skills. Now, the biggest confusion that a lot of people have about apathy is about, it has to be something really grand, or something that has to be out of the ordinary. No, apathy could be, even the littlest things in life, like, that you'd maybe do on a day-to-day basis, like opening the door for people in your passing in public, especially if a person has a physical impairment, or passing down an item off a top shelf that someone can't reach in a supermarket, or even just saying hello to someone and asking how is their day going. Those little acts of kindness and that can go a long way. And as you start practicing those kind of things, the more you're going to become better at dealing with those situations with talking to people. You have no idea how much these little acts can mean to other people, especially as we live in a society that is always about, self, and never takes into consideration, the emotions and feelings of others. Most of the time, you might get a response where people are just silent and are just absolutely rude. But don't let that deter you from the progress you are making, and know that you are making a difference to the world, even if other people don't recognise it. Because it's not your job to tell people how they should behave, when they should have the ability to do that for themselves. Focus on becoming the best version of yourself, and the right people will come to you. I think autistic people can be the moral compass, the shining examples of how a person should show respect, kindness and compassion that the world needs for other people to look up to. If you've got the knowledge and abilities to build your individual characters upwards and feel proud in the progress that you are making. Number 3, research and participate in positive environments that encourages you in many forms to be your best self. By finding environments and groups of people that have shared interests and experiences are great opportunities for you to practice expressing emotions and apathy towards others, especially when the other people within that group might be able to relate to you. Is often easier and to be able to express those emotions compared to talking to strangers who might not give the time or thought for you, and to be able to showcase what you're trying to develop in. That's okay, because you aren't supposed to be engaging with every single person on the planet. Focus on being the best version of yourself, and the right people will come to you. Basically, have faith in God and the universe, even when it often doesn't feel like it. Autistic people often excel in showcasing cognitive or compassion apathy, where they're understanding people through shared experiences and they're taking positive action to help others. The main reason why autistic people may struggle with showcasing their skills is because they live in fear, or they worry about the responses from other people for their efforts. 10 years ago, I would have got worried about what other people's opinions or judgments are about me, which would then only derail my efforts or attempts to take action to grow as a person. But then all that would do was just keep me trapped in that vicious cycle over and over again. It was only when I said enough is enough and developed this, I don't give a damn attitude about things, and just let things let it go over my head, the more freer I became as a person. That's not to say that I still have things and moments where things might get to me, and I do maybe care too much about certain things. But it's mainly about having a different approach to managing things better, and to not let other people or their biased judgments stop you in your tracks of where you want to go in life, and have the determination and to keep thriving forward and becoming the best version of yourself, even when it might feel impossible in doing so. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and please do consider subscribing to the Aspergian Journal on YouTube and Substack so you can be kept in the loop for when new content is released. As always, thank you.